So now let's proceed in pricing techniques. So there are many types of pricing techniques. This may include first, premium pricing. Use a high price where there is a uniqueness about the products or service. Just like for example, smartphone like Apple, di ba? Mas mahal siya kay lindot magud kay siya og quality compared to other smartphone brand. Next, penetration pricing. The price charged for products and services is set artificially low in order to gain market share. For example, smartphone providers such as Android use a penetration pricing strategy to win new customers and create loyalty to the brand, often introduce new or seasonal products at a lower price. Next, economy pricing. This is a no frills low price. The cost of marketing and manufacturing are kept at a minimum. Economy pricing strategy uses lower price to generate higher sales volume. For example, in private label products like generic, di ba mas barato ra basta generika. Or no frills service offering like budget airline sa economy, di ba mas barato ra basta sa economy. Next, price skimming. Charging a high price because of substantial competitive advantage. However, the advantage is not sustainable. Price skimming is a pricing strategy in which a business sets a high initial price for a new product and then gradually lower it over time. For example, iPhone, di ba? Mahal siya at first release, then mabarato siya if nanapoy model nga bag-o na ma-release. Pareha sa katong ako ang iPhone, like sa una iPhone 6 tag kuan pa to kung palit ato tag 10k, then karon mapalit na siya nana na siya sa 6 or 4 5k kapin na ron. Next, psychological pricing. This approach is used when the market wants the customer to respond on an emotional rather than rational basis. For example, price point perspective. Instead of 100 pesos, 99.99. Next, product line pricing, where there is a range of products or services that the pricing reflect the benefits of part of the range. For example, soda float. Regular soda is 8 pesos and the ice cream is 15 pesos and the whole float is 23 pesos. Next, optional product pricing. Companies will attempt to increase the amount customers spend once they start to buy. Just for example, the toys in a meal like Happy Meal and Jolly Meals. Next, captive product pricing, where products have complements. Companies will charge a premium price where the consumer is captured. Example, Sunday, a machine company will offer menu boards fitted to the machine. Next, product bundle pricing. Her seller combined several products in the same package. This also serves to move old stock. For example, large box of vanilla milk with 3 small sachets of chocolate milk. Next, promotional pricing. Pricing to promote a product is very common application. For example, ani is buy one take one. Next, geographical pricing. Geographical pricing is evident where there are variation in price in different parts of the world. Just for example, rarity value or where shipping costs increase price. Next, value pricing. This approach is used where external factors such as recession or increased competition, companies are forced to provide value for products and services to retain sales. Value-based pricing can help businesses stand out from their competitors by highlighting the unique benefits of their products or services. For example, a restaurant that sources local organic ingredients may charge higher price, distinguishing itself from competitors that use conventional produce. So now let's proceed in pricing method. First, reasonable pricing method. A manager using this method subjectively established selling price list based upon personal belief about price levels that represent value for the guest. Next, the highest price method. This method suggests that the selling price be set as high as possible, then reduced slightly to allow for margin of error in management judgment about guest ability to pay. Next, the loose leather price method. With these tactics, the menu selling price for one or more items is set at the lowest possible price with the thought that guests will be attracted as to who will then purchase other products at regular or even higher prices. Next, the intuitive pricing method. This approach actually involves little more than guessing about menu selling price and then establishing other prices if the first plan doesn't work. Next, new pricing method. This is the worst of all possible pricing practice, which is used too often. When it is used, the services staff and cook, not the manager, set selling prices. And last, objective pricing method. Objective pricing method are pricing techniques that involves computation where values used are products of a feasibility study or from a previous operation and sales history. So there are two types of objective pricing: feasibility study based method and non-feasibility study based method. Feasibility study based method includes markup factor pricing, contribution margin pricing, ratio pricing. Feasibility study based prime costing method, bottom up pricing, and the non-feasibility study based method includes standard food cost percentage method, prime cost method, and cost plus pricing. So first, markup factor pricing. A markup factor is used to cover all cost. Step 1. Determine the cost of the ingredients in the menu item being priced. Formula: ingredient cost per serving equals total cost of ingredients divided by number of servings. Step 2. Determine the multiplier to be used in marking up the ingredients cost. Formula: budgeted food cost percentage equals budgeted food cost over budgeted food revenue times 100. For multiplier equals 1 divided by budgeted food cost percentage. Step 3. Determine the base selling price. Base selling price equals ingredients cost per serving times multiplier. Example: assume that the budgeted revenue for the first quarter of 2009 is 875,000. The budgeted food cost is 225,000. Determine the base selling price of buffalo wings if the ingredient cost is 10 pesos and its gravy with ingredient cost of 13.32. Given budgeted revenue 875,000, budgeted food cost 325,000, buffalo wings ingredients cost 10 pesos, gravy ingredients cost 3.32. So the solution: step 1, determine the ingredient cost per serving. ingredient cost is already given. Buffalo wings ingredient cost is 10 pesos. Gravy ingredient cost is 3.32. Step 2, determine the budgeted food cost percentage and multiplier. The formula is budgeted food cost percentage equals budgeted food cost divided by budgeted food revenue times 100%. So the budgeted food cost is 325,000 divided by budgeted food revenue 875,000 times 100% equals 37.14%. So mao na ang budgeted food cost percentage. So for multiplier, 1 divided by budgeted food cost percentage. So multiplier equals 1 divided by 37.14%. Ang answer niya is 2.6926. And step 3, determine the base selling price. Base selling price equals ingredient cost per serving times multiplier. Base selling price of buffalo wings equals 10 pesos, di ba? Times nato sa multiplier 2.6926 or 27. Base selling price of gravy 3.32 times 2.698 or 910 pesos. Note that the base selling price may not be the actual price but the minimum price set for the food items. You cannot set the price lower than the base selling price because of potential loss. Total food cost 400,000 pesos. Total John food cost 250,000 pesos. Forecasted profit 75,000 pesos. Ingredient cost of certain menu item equals 40 pesos. Next, contribution margin pricing. It is the amount of the item contributes to non-food cost and profit. Step 1, determine the average contribution margin per guest. The formula, average contribution margin per guest equals total non-food cost plus profit over number of expected guests. Example 1, the management approves that the budget for restaurant non-food costs will be 400,000. This will be used in buying non-food supplies such as takeout cups, packaging, and etc. As forecasted, they will serve 10,000 guests for the entire month. They required 60,000 profit per dishes. Calculate the base selling price of one of their dishes if its ingredient cost per serving is 40 pesos. Given budgeted non-food cost 400,000, number of expected guests 10,000, desired profit 60,000, ingredient cost per serving 40 pesos. Solution. Step 1, determine the average contribution margin per guest. Average number contribution margin per guest equals total non-food cost plus profit over number of expected guests equals 4,000, which is total non-food cost plus profit 60,000 divided by 10,000 number of expected guests equals 46 pesos. Step 2, determine the base selling price. Base selling price equals average contribution margin per guest plus ingredient cost per serving. Base selling price equals 46 pesos plus 40 pesos equals 86 pesos. Next, ratio pricing. Assesses the relationship between ingredients cost and non-ingredient cost plus profit requirements and then uses this ratio to develop base selling price for menu items. Step 1, calculate the ratio of ingredient cost to non-food cost and profit. Formula, ratio equals total non-food cost plus profit total food cost. Step 2, calculate the total non-food cost and profit for the menu item equals ratio times ingredients cost. Step 3, determine the base selling price. Example, assume that the operating budget of family-style restaurant indicates total non-food cost equals 250,000, profit to 75,000, total food cost is 40,000. So in solution, step 1, calculate the ratio of ingredient cost, non-food cost, and profit. Ratio equals total non-food cost plus profit over total food cost. Ratio equals 250,000, which is the total non-food cost, profit 75,000, and total food cost 400,000 equals 0.81. So next, feasibility study based prime costing method. Prime cost refer to the largest costs incurred by most restaurant food and labor. Prime cost pricing involves assessing food and labor costs for the restaurant and factoring this cost into pricing equation. Step 1, determine the labor cost per guest. Labor cost per guest equals labor cost number of expecting guests. Step 2, determine the prime cost per guest. Prime cost per guest equals prime cost per guest times ingredient cost per serving. Step 3, determine base selling price. Base selling price equals price cost per guest over desired prime cost percentage, where desired prime cost percentage equals food cost percent, labor cost percent. Example, assume that the following are the restaurant operating budget. Calculate the base selling price using simple prime cost method. Labor cost equals 210,000, number of expected guests 50,000, desired prime cost percent 62%, ingredient cost per serving 28 pesos. Solution. Step 1, determine the labor cost per guest. Labor cost per guest equals labor cost over number of expecting guests equals 210,000 mao ang labor cost, i-divide na to siya sa 50,000 mao ang number of expecting guests equals 4.2. Step 2, determine the prime cost per guest. Prime cost per guest 4.2 times ingredient cost per serving 28 equals 117.6 pesos. Step 3, determine base selling price. Base selling price equals price cost per guest over desired prime cost percentage equals 117.6 pesos over 62% equals 189.68 pesos. Next, bottom-up pricing. A bottom-up pricing method can be used to determine the average meal price for a restaurant. Step 1, determine desired net income. Net income equals owner investment desired return of investment, ROI. Step 2, determine pre-tax profit. Pre-tax profit equals net income over 1 minus tax rate. Step 3, determine interest expense. Found borrowed. Interest expense equals amount borrowed times interest rate. Step 4, determine operating expense. Meal price. Step 5, determine required food revenue. Food revenue equals pre-tax profit plus interest expense plus operating expense divided by 1 minus food cost percentage. Step 6, determine number of meals to be served. Meal to be served equals days open times number of seats times seats turnover. Step 7, determine the average meal price equals total revenue divided by meal to be served. Note that the average meal price will serve as the lowest price limit for all the menu. No item must be set below the average, otherwise losses will occur in the long run. Example, using the data below, determine the average meal price of Kopiko Cafe. Owner's investment equals 500,000. Funds borrow 1 million. Tax rate 25%. Operating expense 800,000. Food cost percent 40%. Set turnover twice a day. Days open 365 days. Number of seats 100 seats. Solution. Step 1, determine desired net income. Net income equals owner's investment desired times ROI equals 500,000 pesos times 12% equals 60,000. Step 2, determine interest expense. Fund borrow. Pre-tax profit equals net income divided by the 1 of minus tax rate equals 60,000 pesos. Net income divided by the 1 minus 25% equals 24. Mo na siya makuha siya og 80,000 pesos. Step 3, determine interest expense. Fund borrow. Interest expense equals amount borrow times interest rate equals 1 million amount borrow times 10% interest rate equals 100,000. Step 4, determine operating expense. Operating expense is 800,000. Step 5, determine required food revenue. Food revenue equals pre-tax profit plus interest expense plus operating expense divided by 1 minus food cost percentage. Food revenue equals 80,000 pre-tax profit plus 100,000 mao ang interest expense plus 80,000 mao ang operating expense divided by 1 minus 40% equals 1,633,333.33. Step 6, determine number of meals to be served. Meals to be served equals 365 times 100 times 2 equals 73,000. Step 7, determine the average meal price. Average meal price equals total revenue divided by meals to be served. Average meal price equals 1,633,333.33 divided by 73,000 equals 22.37 or 23 pesos. Next, non-feasibility study-based method. So, first, prime cost method. The modified prime cost method is suitable for small-scale operation. It covers wastage allowance, which deals with trimming, shrinkage, and other preparation losses. The wrap-around cost covers the garnishes, sauces, and the other items related to plating, while the 1.3 constant value carries the utility costs such as electricity, water, and gas. Step 1, determine ingredient cost per serving. Formula: ingredient cost per serving equals total cost divided by number of serving. Step 2, determine the wastage allowance. Wastage allowance equals ingredient cost per serving times 0.1. 10% is the most widely acceptable wastage rate. Step 3, determine wrap-around cost. Wrap-around cost equals ingredient cost times 0.05. Step 4, determine the labor cost. Labor cost equals ingredient cost times 0.6. Step 5. Determine the selling price. Selling price equals ingredient cost per serving plus wastage allowance plus wrap around cost plus labor cost times 1.3. Example 1. Joy was asked to cook a special kare-kare for a certain celebration. She went to the market and purchased ingredients worth 7,000 pesos. If she is going to serve it to 70 persons, what would be the selling price per serving? Given total ingredient cost 7,000, number per serving 70. Solution. Step 1. Determine ingredient cost per serving. Ingredient cost per serving equals total cost divided by number of serving. 7,000 divided by 70 equals 100 pesos. Step 2. Determine the wastage allowance. Wastage allowance equals ingredient cost per serving times 0.10 equals 100 pesos times 0.10 equals 10 pesos. Step 3. Determine wrap around cost. Wrap around cost equals ingredient cost times 0.5 equals 100 pesos times 0.5 equals 5 pesos. Step 4. Determine the labor cost. Ingredient cost times 0.6, 100 pesos, which is the ingredient cost, times 0.6 equals 60 pesos. Step 5. Determine the selling price. Selling price equals ingredient cost per serving plus wastage allowance plus wrap around cost plus labor cost times 1.3 equals 100 pesos plus 10 plus 5 plus 60 times 1.3 equals 227.5 or 228 pesos. Note that you may adjust the selling price of the food item to the next whole number to avoid problems in changing centavos. Next, cost plus approach. This is one of the easiest and quickest method of establishing price. This is suitable also for small-scale operation like cafeteria and carinderia. Overhead costs such as rent, utilities, and includes to compute the selling price of the food item. Step 1. Determine the ingredient cost per serving. Ingredient cost per serving equals total cost divided by number of serving. Step 2. Determine the overhead cost. Overhead cost equals ingredient cost per serving times 0.50. Step 3. Determine the wrap around cost. Wrap around cost equals ingredients times 0.05. Step 3. Determine the profit. Profit equals ingredient cost per serving times 0.5. Step 5. Determine the selling price. Selling price equals ingredient cost plus overhead cost plus wrap around cost plus profit. Note that the values used in overhead cost, wrap around cost, and profit are the percentage of those costs over ingredient cost. Example, what is the selling price of pork hamonado if its ingredient cost is 40 pesos? Solution. Step 1. Determine the ingredient cost per serving. Ingredient cost per serving equals 40 pesos. Step 2. Determine the overhead cost. Overhead cost equals ingredient cost per serving times 0.15. 4 equals 40 pesos times 0.15 equals 6. Step 3. Determine the wrap around cost. Wrap around cost equals ingredient cost 0.05 equals 40 pesos times 0.5 equals 2 pesos. Step 4. Determine the profit. Profit equals 40 pesos times 0.5 equals 20 pesos. Step 5. Determine the selling price. Selling price equals 40 pesos plus 6 plus 2 plus 20 pesos equals 68 pesos. Next, last, food cost percentage method. This method used a standard food cost percentage of 35% having 65% as gross profit margin percentage. Step 1, determine the ingredient cost per serving. Ingredient cost per serving equals total cost divided by number of serving as always. Step 2, determine the wrap-around cost. Wrap-around cost ingredient cost times 0.05. Step 3, determine the selling price. Selling price equals ingredient cost per serving plus wrap-around cost divided by 35%. Example, determine the selling price of bulalo if the ingredient cost per serving is 50 pesos. Solution, determine the ingredient cost per serving. Ingredient cost per serving is 50 pesos given na siya. Step 2, determine the wrap-around cost. Wrap-around cost equals ingredient cost times 0.5. 50 pesos times 0.5 equals 2.5. Step 3, determine the selling price. Selling price equals 50 pesos ingredient cost per serving plus 2.5 mao ang wrap-around cost. I-divide na to siya 30% equals 150 pesos. So that's all our report. Thank you for your listening and God bless.